Hey everyone, as you join me in this breakout session, feel free to say hello in the discussion forum. Something about yourself, where you are in the world. Let me know that there are folks out there because it's so surreal to present at a conference in this format. And just to be aware, I will be monitoring the discussion forum as I'm going through these slides. You can enter any questions that you have into the Q&A box, but I'm not going to hop over to that part of my screen to the Q&A until we get to the discussion. So, I'm sorry, until the discussion and the Q&A at the end. So, discussion forum while we're getting started and then QA at the end. Welcome everyone. Looks like we've got a lot of US represented, East Coast to West Coast, so welcome. This breakout session is about reasons why we resist, or in other words, procrastination. As I considered topics for this session a few months ago, I was thoughtful about topics that would be really universal and across industries because I'm giving a non tech talk. So, topics that would be really universal. And this is what I came up with because I think all of us can come up with things that we stall, that we put off, that we resist, either in certain circumstances or as a matter of habit. So that's why we're going to dig in on this topic today, and I hope you find some useful strategies as we go through. Next slide, please. I always like to share a little bit about myself, especially for those of you who don't know me. Although I have had a relationship with Girls in Tech for about 5 years, I spoke at the conference real, live, and in person in 2017. I've had a wonderful and warm relationship with Adriana and her team over the years. Have talked at the Boston chapter a few years ago. So I'm a passionate supporter and champion of Girls in Tech, and I'm delighted to be here today with all of you, and I wish that we were truly together. I will have contact information at the end, and I would love to hear from you. Any questions or comments that you have on this topic, or just to stay connected. So a little bit about me. That's me at probably 5 years old. I grew up on the East Coast, but I've lived East, West, and in between. Um, I graduated Princeton. I went through some education about like 13 years after a marketing career. I went through some additional education to become a coach. And I work have my own business as a career and leadership coach now. And that's what connected me to Girls in Tech. I'm passionate about my kids. I'm passionate about cookies. And I too have my own set of things that I resist, including, but not limited to, cleaning, self care, and guess what? Writing presentations. It's a funny thing and ironic because am excited to be a presenter today and was excited about putting together this presentation. And then I got stuck along the way. And so I resisted getting started, getting it done, and I wondered why that was. So as I talk through some of the reasons why we resist things, maybe, it will come to light what was the root cause of my own procrastination. Next slide, please. You'll notice that I'm using procrastination and resistance interchangeably through the presentation. When we procrastinate, we're putting something off, we're resisting doing it. That could mean an inability to make a decision, an inability to get started, an inability to follow through, not thinking about it at all, just completely avoiding it. But what I like about this word resisting is that it's not a label that we slap on our heads like, I'm a procrastinator. And I think resisting better reflects that internal sensation that we experience when we're struggling to lean in on something. And so, maybe it's a mental trick to think about it as resistance versus procrastination, but maybe it also makes it an easier challenge to overcome it and move through resistance rather than to try and remove a label that we've given ourselves. Next slide, please. So my question for all of you right in this moment to put into the discussion forum is, what are you putting off right now? Let me know that I'm not alone. Let us all know that we're not alone, that we all have something that we're resisting right now. And if there's nothing, then just let me know why you're here, because that's helpful too. Oh, so much good stuff. Writing, studying, exercising, work projects. Yeah. Who doesn't have something that they're putting off? Probably no one. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to take us through today is, my own top 10 that I've developed through coaching, explanations for procrastination. And listen, it's not, there aren't pure lines here. There can be overlap. There can be a combination of reasons in any given circumstance. But in differentiating them this way, my objective is to give you a lens through which to examine your own resistance and to figure out what's holding you back from moving towards something. And in many cases, something that you actually really want. After the top 10, we'll talk about the difference between procrastination as a condition versus a symptom. Then we'll look at some strategies for moving through and pressing on when we meet resistance in ourselves. And then we'll talk about the impact of inaction. And then I aim to leave time for discussion because that is always my favorite part, is connecting more directly with all of you. So that's our agenda for today. Next slide, please. As we move through these slides, you'll see some really phenomenal and adorable illustrations that a dear friend of mine, an artist, a designer, a fellow coach, an incredible spirit out in the world put together for this presentation. I told my friend David that I had some great thoughts, but some really dull, plain white slides on procrastination, and that I needed to give the audience something that I couldn't bring to the table, something that would bring the concepts to life and to also entertain your eyes while we talk about, what is sometimes a difficult subject. So he agreed to help me out, and what he created just for this presentation is amazing and beyond my expectations. So I hope you find them and we'll call her our female hero, as delightful as I do as we move through these pages. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with unclear vision as a reason why we put things off. And in your head, this might sound like when you ask yourself, why am I putting this off? Why is this so hard? It might sound like I'm not sure what I want. And so it's no surprise. It's hard to move forward if we don't know what we're moving towards, plain and simple. This could mean an unclear vision for a project or something more significant like some shift on your career path. In a classic example that I see in coaching, clients will tell me that they want to make a positive change in their careers, and then they'll express frustration with themselves that they haven't made more changes or even initiated a process around change. But when I probe, it turns out that they haven't decided on a new direction or exactly what change they'd like to make. So it makes sense that, they've put it off because they aren't certain what they want to do instead. And, in a way to identify this, I will ask the question, well, how clear are you on what you want right now? And if they're not clear, if they can't answer that, then, we have a better sense of what work we have to do. And as I said, I'll be talking more about strategies for each of these, procrastination top 10 a little bit later. Next slide, please. Number two, lack of an action plan. In your head, again, when you ask yourself, why is this so hard? Why am I not moving forward? It might sound like, well, I'm uncertain of next steps, or I'm uncertain about the path forward. And sometimes when I ask that question, how clear are you on what you want to do instead, or what changes you want to make? I will get a very clear answer like, well, I want to leave this line of work. I want to get a master's degree, or I'm looking to start my own consulting business. And I'll say, great, what's the next step? And hear crickets in return. Sometimes it's just not clear what the next steps are, or even first steps, or what the path forward will look like. And if we're unsure of the steps that we need to take, well, it makes perfect sense to stand still and put it off until we figure it out. Next slide, please. Lack of urgency, lack of accountability. This this often sounds like an excuse. Well, I work better with deadlines, or, I work better with partners, some sort of, excuse around why it's not getting done. And by the way, riding on the back of the tortoise, like, this is my, like, 100% favorite illustration in this deck. We've all sat on a tortoise and just, not moved as quickly as we'd like, in comparison to, I don't know, riding on the back of a rabbit. Sometimes we resist taking care of something because it's just not urgent enough, or, not yet. So we spend our time focused on the things that have deadlines that require our immediate attention. And I think for most of us, what that means is responding to emails, right? I'm sure this is relatable for everyone. So we're getting caught up in responding to emails rather than working on the strategy deck that's due next month with a deadline that feels far off. But we'll put it off endlessly until, we're we're writing it the night before, right? That one real deadline is right in front of us, and we're in a mad dash to get it done. When we cram for tests or stay up all night writing that paper or writing an application, that's the downside of this form of resistance, is just not being able to manage and move things forward in the absence of urgency. When it comes to accountability, I think this will be familiar too. I had a client who was working with a physical trainer through up to the pandemic, and she fell off her regimen because she stopped working with her trainer and during COVID, and that accountability of her weekly sessions kept her on track without her trainer saying, 10 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. She wasn't able to hold herself similarly accountable. And that can make it harder to get back into a routine or to get back on track with something that in many cases we really do want to reinstate. All right, next slide, please. Uncertainty of or delayed reward and I'm sorry, uncertainty of or delayed reward or success. This might sound like, oh, it's going to take too long, or, I worry that it's going to be a waste of time. What if it fails? Fear of failure is definitely tied into this one. What if I sit here all day fishing and I catch a boot? To use the example again of getting caught up in emails, sometimes we'll do that because it's so immediately gratifying to knock out a couple of emails. Meanwhile, we've got a great idea to share with our team or our manager. We want to put together some slides. But if the reward or the value of that endeavor feels less certain, it may be emotionally less challenging to do that instead. And so we'll put it off. And then, on a grander scale, having a new business idea or thinking about a large career shift, we could put that off for fear of failure too. So we keep doing what we've done, and we don't make moves because we want to stick with what feels more certain. And I'll address that idea of certainty when we talk about strategies. Next slide, please. Cautionary tales. Actually, this is a favorite illustration as well. This one will be familiar to everyone. You have an idea about something that you want to do or something you could be, and you decide to be vulnerable and share it with others, which in many situations is very beneficial. But what you get back are anecdotes and cautionary tales of others who've tried and failed what you aim to try. Oh, I know somebody who started a new business and it didn't work out. And, a story amplified that scares you away, and stalls you. And the thing about these, fireside tale tellers, is that they believe that their intentions are good, and we think that when we share these anecdotes, sharing reasons why, maybe you shouldn't fully invest in something, it's, perhaps intended to spare you the trouble or to spare you the pain. But oftentimes the tales are not applicable to your situation, mainly because they thanks, mom. It's so true. Oftentimes the tales are not applicable to your situation, mainly because they happen to somebody else. And yet we still see them as a warning, and that can be powerfully inhibiting. We just, paralyzing, really. Okay, next slide, please. I call this one the shackles of comfort and familiarity, um, where we sort of urge ourselves to just be grateful, for what we have and to embrace what's comfortable about our current situation, even as change and the possibility of change is nagging at us. I was having a conversation yesterday with a client who has some significant frustrations at work, and she shared them with me in detail. And then at the end of what she was sharing, she said, I should just be grateful for everything that I have here because if I leave, I'm giving up all of these benefits that I probably won't find anywhere else." And she was in this headspace, around gratitude. And what happened is that it limited her, right? It took away from her the power that she might have to change her circumstances and find more of what she wants and less of what she doesn't want, mainly a lot of frustration. So, in effect, she shut herself down from feeling her frustrations and possibly taking steps to make things better by pointing out what was comfortable about her current situation. And maybe there is a lot that's good about that situation, but there's value in teasing it apart to understand what's good, but also, what could be better. And listen, don't get me wrong, a mindset of gratitude and awareness of your mindset can always be useful. But we don't want that sort of gratitude mantra to limit us from exploring and considering other possibilities either. Next slide, please. This is our little rollerblader with lots of padding on to protect her from the world. Also, what my 3-year-old looks like when she's on her scooter. I'm risk averse. I'm risk averse. I don't like to take risks. You know what? Some of us just don't like change, or really recoil at the idea and possibility of change, and that's reasonable because change can be so uncomfortable. But just as I said on the last slide, that the thought I should be grateful sometimes puts constraints on considering possibilities. So too does a statement like, "Well, I'm just risk averse," right? And it's a very common, explanation I hear as far as why people resist changes that they need or even, really want to make. But and the reason is they anticipate it being uncomfortable or not working out or downright failing. And listen, all these outcomes, they're possible. But when we hide behind our risk aversion as an explanation for why we're not taking any steps, we're missing an opportunity to assess exactly how much risk is involved and which outcomes might actually be more likely than a failure, right? And, we have to remember the only constant is change, as they say. We can't ultimately we can't resist or avoid it. Um, and even in knowing that, risk aversion can be very strong, and so this becomes a harder one to overcome. But we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Breaking norms. I would be the first. I would be the only. Complete the sentence here. There are, social norms and gender norms and within our things within our family that are norms. um Sometimes we resist and like put off or hold back because we're moving into unfamiliar territory and we don't have role models or a personal frame of reference for what we're thinking about doing. I have a client who is thinking about, was thinking about, sorry, we worked last summer. I have a client who was thinking about starting her own business and becoming a consultant. In other words, leaving her company, blazing her own trail. But she had no role models for this in her family, and no support. She told me that her father had worked at a job his whole career, working for someone else, and made it clear to her that he could neither understand why she would leave her current job nor why she would want to work for herself. No one in the family had ever done this. I have female clients who tell me that they're on paths that no women in their families have walked before. I have male and female clients whose dreams may not be the norm in the cultures in which they grew up. Being the first, being the only can be a real barrier to moving forward if it makes you feel isolated, not understood or seen, or worse, frowned upon by those that you count on to support you. So this is this is a tougher one. And as you're seeing, these explanations are getting more complex, as we go through these explanations. Next slide, please. Here's our gal in a box. And this is about limiting beliefs, and the things that we believe that get us stuck. And limiting beliefs are just what they sound like. They are beliefs that we hold for whatever reason that limit us from seeing a full range of opportunities. Excuse me. An example of a limiting belief for someone thinking about starting her own business might be owning your own business is a never ending hustle. It's exhausting. Maybe this was told to you at some point, or maybe you saw someone that hustle and struggle and fail, through accumulated experiences and or the messaging that we receive. We come to believe things as fact, right? It just becomes like, well, that's the truth, right? Owning your own business is a hustle. And that belief could be the reason why you haven't taken any steps forward, even if you have a truly viable idea, a great partner, a business plan, a lot of ways to support your plan. That limiting belief it's just trapping you. Another example of a limiting belief, this time from a client who was thinking about quitting a full-time job to become a writer. He said, I always believe that you should only leave a job for another job that pays you better. Right? That's the truth, right? Like these limiting beliefs become the truth for us. And this belief got him really stuck because he felt that the ideal plan for him was to switch to working part time to give himself more time to write. He'd thought it through. He'd looked at his budget, found that he could afford to take this approach, this hybrid approach, for a year. Right? He'd done all the work to support the plan, but that limiting belief held him captive, and he could not move forward until he could let go of that. And oh yes, limiting belief, I'm too old to make a career change. Lisa, I hear it all the time. And then I work with 30s and 40s and 50s who make changes. Next slide, please. All right, so this one's the doozy. um, it's one thing to have a lack of vision or lack of a plan, or to need some structure, or to need some accountability. And then it's a little bit heavier to be really risk averse, right? This one I think is one of the toughest, if not the toughest of all, because it stems from a sense of self, a sense of who we are, of what we are or aren't, at our core. And it's actually Kimberly, who was speaking a short while ago, was talking about, you are enough, and there's an adjective here. You are everything enough, right? You are ambitious enough and worthy and prepared, smart enough. Uh, the gremlin, this is what we call it in coaching. That gremlin is your inner critic that tells you that you're not enough. So not ambitious enough might mean not taking steps at work that will help you get promoted. I'm not worthy enough might mean not stepping fully into a relationship or allowing yourself to be vulnerable. I'm not organized enough could cause someone who's a great coach to not go out into the world and share their gift because they don't think they'll be able to manage the business side of their coaching business. So we're talking here about limiting beliefs about oneself that are deeply rooted and paralyzing because they undermine our confidence and make us believe that we aren't equipped to have or worthy of having what we seek. Um, and this creates real challenges for us when we dream and we imagine what could be, and then the gremlin chimes in. You can't have that. You're not enough. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in our strategies session. Next slide. Sorry, in the strategies section, not session. Okay, so that is my top 10. I'm wondering if I missed any. And so feel free to, you know, share. I'm watching the feed here. It looks like there's some great conversation. I love, Lisa, that you said everything you need you already have. It's a real mindset shift for some of us to believe that, but it's so empowering. Decision indecision paralysis. Yeah, I mean, basically, we're talking about resistance and procrastination, which is indecision and paralysis, right? All of these reasons are reasons why we don't take steps forward. I'm also curious if through in going through those top 10, for any of you, you've pinpointed your reason for resisting that thing that you named, earlier in there. For my part, I think my challenge with this presentation was that I got excited about the topic, but I had a lack of a complete vision that got me stuck. So I sat down and I started creating it, but I didn't have in mind my story arc. And so there were a good couple of weeks there of paralysis that didn't allow me to finish it, until I mapped it out and created my storyline, and that became easier to get back into it. So lack of vision. I think this is particularly true of projects that we're working on that we can't get started, where we need to step back and ask ourselves the vision from beginning to end on something, something we're writing or something that we're creating. Because once we get into it, if we don't have that, if we don't have that path, we can really get stuck. Okay, next slide, please. So I hinted at this when I was talking about risk aversion and lack of confidence, that some reasons for resistance actually feel like they're like part of our nature. And then at other times, our resistance or our procrastination may be more particular to the situation. And so it's helpful to explore if your procrastination is a symptom or a condition, which I think is a really helpful framing, right? So, you know, ask yourself, is it always hard for me to make decisions, or is there something about this situation that makes it harder, right? If this decision is hard, like take a career change, for example, because your partner's unemployed and you're the household breadwinner, then the difficulty might be a symptom of that particular situation, right? Like in these particular circumstances, this change is hard. It's hard to move forward because it feels like the stakes are high in a very unique kind of way, right? If every decision around your career is difficult and slow or avoided and delayed, and you seem to stay in jobs, too long, this could be a condition, right? And this could play into like self-doubt about the way that you make decisions, that you don't trust yourself, right? Then it's more of a condition. Like I'm really challenged to make decisions, right? And maybe avoid them, for great lengths of time. And so I asked this question, for you to consider when you're stuck and like really stuck, and these other strategies aren't helping you move forward, to think about whether this is a symptom, and then you can name it, or if it's a condition. Because understanding how deeply the resistance is entrenched, understanding these things can help us find the right strategies and to deal with underlying conditions if they're there. Okay. Next slide, please. So here's our ninja hero with strategies for moving through resistance. All right. The way that I've presented them here with the limited time we have, they're way oversimplified. And not I'm not fully able to guide you through the mud and the mental blocks, but I want to suggest some starting points for self-empowerment and for starting your engines when you've stalled. And you know what, I also want to emphasize that even as we talk about moving through resistance, it's not true that they're all meant to be moved through. You should trust that the resistance is happening for a reason, and that there's an opportunity in examining the situation for you to learn about yourself. So take the time to reflect on why you're stuck, to consider symptom versus condition, and to realize that certain types of resistance are not something to just push or ram through. You may have an instinct that what you're putting off doing is actually not something that you should be or want to be doing. And maybe you don't have to, and you can make a different choice. But you won't discover this if you don't take the time and be curious and compassionate towards yourself and recognize that we're all human and every single one of us has situations, circumstances and, types of challenges that we resist. Like that's just how we roll. All right, next slide, please. All right, so as I said, these are going to be um, dramatically oversimplified here, but hopefully you'll get the idea. And like I said, I have my contact information at the end for any follow-ups. So we talked about unclear vision and that question of, how clear are you about what you want to be doing or what change you want to make? And in many cases, we don't have a clear vision. There is work that we can do here to clarify what's holding you back, right? You can do some vision work, you can do some values work, you can create a mission statement that gives you your North Star for your career to get clear about, not just what drives you professionally, but what drives you, in your life because career is meant to fulfill on other things that you want in your life. You can if you can clarify your vision, it becomes easier to visualize and move towards it. When it comes to, being challenged around lack of an action plan, um, hopefully many of you are familiar with this, the SMART goal framework where we get really specific around a path and next steps. And also, there's accountability that's in that too, right? Because of the specific nature and the time oriented nature of the SMART goal framework. So use that SMART goal framework to plan even one next step and hold yourself accountable to take it. That can be really helpful when you feel like, well, I just haven't moved forward because I don't have a plan. And when accountability is an issue, we can look to structures that put accountability back in place. It could be a coach, it could be a mentor, it could be a business partner, it could be an accountability partner. I actually recently heard the term accountability buddy. Accountability buddy being a buddy who can hold you accountable. Um, and that can be really helpful. Like, this is what I intend to do. I mean, a partner of, a friend can be really helpful if you say, listen, I'm really intending to do this by next week. Please help me get there. I'm saying it out loud because I mean it. And I want you to ask me about it. And then, you know what, when time management is an issue around the lack of urgency, create a timeline and find an accountability partner, right? But recognize that you have options here to help you move this forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had our fisher gal who was feeling uncertain about whether fishing would pay off. Again, I think we have to get away from this idea that there is ever certainty in life, in work, in the things that we do. There's uncertainty in all choices. And I think just remembering that, oh, I don't want to, leave this job because that new job is uncertain. Well, I don't know. A lot of us work in places where it's at will employment, and that's not certain either. Like I think we sort of skew our thinking to like this is a certain thing, and this one feels uncertain. And I think we need to level the playing field and remember there's uncertainty many areas of life, all areas of life. So it helps to look at factors that are predictive of success, right? Because we can draw confidence from what we've done and what we've learned in the past. There already may be some indications that your idea has legs, and that your plan makes sense, right? And if there's so much discomfort with the uncertainty that you're not ready to break into a run yet, but there's also no clear indicator that it's not going to work out either, then at least give yourself one next step to see what you can learn from it. And that's where we just need to like nudge ourselves forward. I don't know that it's going to succeed, but I don't know that it's going to fail either. Right? There's no certainty of failure either. So, how do I give this a little more breathing room, give this a little bit more chance to succeed? Let's take one more next step. Okay. As for cautionary tales, as I mentioned before, these may be shared with you by well-intentioned folks who think that they're sparing you some trouble or pain. Um, but you have to remember that there is here's my soapbox. There's no other you, and there's no one living your life, and there's no one with the gifts that you have who thinks and acts and shows up to the world the way that you do. So these tales don't apply. Okay. Point out to yourself all the reasons why that story is not predictive of your abilities or your likelihood for success, right? Like it's 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 a cautionary tale told at a fireplace with, an outdoor fire with big, spooky ghosts, and it's not real, right? And it doesn't apply. And so we need to just let them go. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. This is a really meaty page. And what I want to say about this is this isn't a one to one alignment of strategies to reasons why we put things off. These five were like, or is it six? These were like some really heavy ones that really require some digging into and don't have, there's no quick fix. But these are some of the ways that I talk this stuff through with clients so that we can like get back in the game again, right? So, um, when I talk about weighing the pain and the gain, this is not dissimilar to pros and cons, but it's a little bit more comprehensive where look at the we look at the pros and cons basically of doing something alongside the pros and cons of not doing something, or the pros and cons of staying the current course, right? So for example, what are the perceived pain points and the perceived gains of starting my own business alongside, well, what's painful about never starting my own business, right? Like we need to look at, pros and cons are like, what are the pros and cons of doing this thing? But we really need to look at inaction and staying, status quo too, because there are things that are painful about that too. And so I think that this applies really when, like, talking about the shackles of comfort. When you feel shackled by what you believe you should be grateful for, excuse me, bring to the surface what's also painful about the current situation, which is what my client had led with the other day. What's leading you to think about change? Because then we make sure that we're not overweighting the gains, right? So the pain gain, and actually, if anybody's interested, I wrote about this on my blog at one point, and I'm happy to share a link if anybody contacts me about it. I think it's really useful when you're thinking like, should I stay or should I go? Should I do this or not do that? It's a really helpful framework. And Catherine, like I said, reach out to me. I won't be able to find it on the dime, but I'm happy to share it. Okay, so another strategy here is to explore the worst case scenario. Actually, I don't know if any of you happen to have been at the 2017 Catalyst conference in San Francisco. I gave a talk called "What's the Worst That Could Happen," because I'm really passionate about going down that rabbit hole, because we're going to do it anyway, right? We're going to think about what's the worst thing that could happen, and that's probably why you're stuck in the first place. But then we can sort of ease our way back out of it and challenge ourselves to think about what are the more likely scenarios, than the worst case scenario, right? Like we think about, well, if I start my own business and it doesn't work out, then I lose my house and I'm back on my parents' couch, and you know, I got nothing but the shirt on my back, if that, right? We really go down that rabbit hole of the worst case scenario. And what's probably more likely is that you're going to have a plan, and you'll have these milestones, and if you don't hit those milestones, then you're going to reevaluate, how much further do I want to take this company? And so maybe it won't work, but the likelihood of that worst case scenario is unlikely, because you're going to be behind the wheel, the whole time steering on this. So I think this is a really really useful tool, like especially with risk aversion, um, to think that through. Examining the cost of inaction. I actually have a slide on this, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think this is really helpful when you're stuck for any reason, to ask yourself, well, what might happen if I don't do anything? Or how is it going to feel if I'm in the same place I am right now 6 months from now, or a year from now, right? And that, like, really, yes, we can be risk averse, But that can also feel really unsettling. Like I know change is scary, but I think what's scarier here is that the picture is going to look exactly the same a year from now, right? And that can really like nudge us, to take some steps. Exploring possibilities for new beliefs, right? And when we talked about limiting beliefs, I explained that like we see them as facts. Running your own business is a hustle. You can't change. You're too old, to do a job change. But we actually can choose to believe something else, right? If I believe that a failure at something is an indication that it wasn't meant to be, then that's really going to limit me. If I choose to believe instead that hard things make us smarter, stronger, more resilient, that's called growth mindset, by the way. It's going to open up a lot more opportunities, right? So so take the time to notice what you believe about yourself and about the world, and to choose to reframe or change your attitudes and beliefs if they don't serve you. Right? You can, and actually, Mindset is a great book if you haven't read it. Like, it sets, fixed mindset versus growth mindset. I'm really passionate about that book, so check it out by Carol Dweck if you're intrigued. Okay, fortifying your support team. This is really important when we talk about like breaking with norms, or breaking the norms or cautionary tales. If you feel alone and unseen or misunderstood, handpicking a support team or building a hive, as I've heard it called, will give you supported, like-minded people who may be striving for similar things. And then you don't feel like you're the salmon swimming upstream. Is it the salmon that swims upstream? The fish that swims upstream, when nobody else is doing what you're doing, building that hive, and finding people who are, dreaming and striving the way you are. And guess what? I think that's why we're all here at the Girls in Tech conference, because this is your hive. But sometimes we can feel really alone with the things that we're striving for, and just a few voices that are speaking, the way that we are can really help. All right, last few thoughts on this slide. Making peace with your gremlin, right? And as I said before, a gremlin is a coaching term for your inner critic, right? And your gremlin undermines your confidence, tells you that you're not enough, keeps you playing small. The funny thing about the gremlin though, is that it's well intentioned in a way, right? In telling you not to do something, you don't have what it takes. It's protective, right? It's keeping you from feeling disappointment, right? Like, think of it as that way. Like, this keeps me safe. If I don't do that, it keeps me safe. The message that we hear that keeps us small, is really, can be really debilitating. But if we imagine that that voice is, believes that it's keeping us safe, right? If we sort of anthropomorphize our gremlin, it's really helpful to figure out how to make peace with that, not to be at peace with the message, but to understand that sometimes these messages take root for a reason from things in our past. Like if we were romantically burned previously, then, the gremlin saying, well, you're not good at relationships, right? In a way that keeps us safe. It doesn't feel good to hear the message in that way. But if we sort of pull it apart and try to identify what's the message and why has that message taken root in me, because it's derived from past experiences, um, that's how we begin to figure out how to release ourselves from that message, right? Like, where did this idea that I'm not ambitious enough to run my own business, where did that come from? Right? Like, what are the experiences? And then how do I even think that that applies to where I am now? I'm a different person. I've learned different things. I've gone to school. I've had more training. Like, I have what it takes. And we just sort of disempower that gremlin, that critic, say, this doesn't apply. I can do this, and regain our confidence. But you know, this is this is deep work. Like, this is tough stuff. So it's oversimplified here. But I think that if you notice recurring messages around being enough, there's something really important to take a look at. Um, Final thought on this slide. Like I said, I know it's really meaty, and then we're like 2 slides away, maybe from more discussion and reading all the comments that you've made. Take action, right? And this really applies, everywhere, right? Or that's the one takeaway, right? Procrastination ends when you take a step. So the best thing that we can do is take a step and end the procrastination cycle. And sometimes we have a lot of work to do before we can take a step, right? All these things that we're talking about here. But sometimes there is a step immediately available, right? And if we, can ask ourselves, what's one small step I can take from here when we're really stuck? If we can find an answer, perhaps we should stop thinking and just do it. Next slide, please. All right. So, impact of inaction, right? This is an important one, perhaps, the most useful lens for viewing the situation when we're not moving forward. Here's what can happen when we don't take action. Right? Opportunities are lost. Other people claim those opportunities, right? If we're not reaching like, "Hey, my boss just left. How do I navigate into that role?" If we're not asking that question, someone else might move into that role and, they wouldn't even know that we were interested, right? So opportunities are lost, nothing happens, that possibility that things are just going to stay exactly the same is pretty high. Um, Pressure builds, leadership is questioned, right? All these, are familiar to us. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I want to make sure that I have time for some Q&A. In leadership roles, right? Trust may erode around leadership, right? Like we look to our leaders to be taking action and we really wonder, why are they not taking action around something important here? Making a statement, pulling the team together. You know, for some of us, like we're in those leadership roles and it's important to demonstrate to our team that we've got their backs. So trust can erode, and all sorts of a myriad of impacts by not doing anything, right? And so I share this with you because I think for all of our fears as to why all of our reasons for not taking those steps forward, we have to look at the impact of not doing anything at all. All right, next slide, please. So I recently read a book called The Confidence Code. Actually, I have it here. Called The Confidence Code, specifically about women and confidence. And there's lots of good stuff in there, and studies that are shown as far as women and confidence. But one of the biggest takeaways is that we can only build confidence through action, right? It's not anything that people can tell us, something that we can sit and think about. I just need to be more confident. Confidence comes through action, right? We do something, we learn from it, we evolve, whether or not it, succeeds. We build confidence and that feeds into our awareness and beliefs about what's possible and what we're capable of, and that cycle repeats, right? And so we need to feed that loop. We need to think, we need to become more self-aware about what's getting in our way, move ourselves to take some action, right? To just keep it staying engaged, right? Keep being, willing to face challenges and take steps. And that will build our confidence because we will see that we are resilient, that we can learn, that we can grow, that we can succeed. And it it over time it actually makes it easier. There's actually another great book. I like throwing all my books at folks that I've been recommending for a long time called The Uncertainty Book. It talks about how some of the most successful people are the ones that like grow comfortable with discomfort and uncertainty and see that it's actually a sign that there's something good in the uncertainty because it means that it hasn't been done before. And so it's a really great reframing of uncertainty as a positive instead of a negative. So with that, next slide please. That brings me to the end of our slides. Here's our very empowered superhero, my last lovely illustration. And I would love to hear, well, actually, I'm going to go over and look at questions in the Q&A and see what questions have come up. Let's see. Harini asks, have you had anyone come to you completely clueless on what they want in their career, but always felt something was missing but couldn't pin in it? Every week, right? Because I put myself out into the world as a career development and career transition coach, I absolutely have people say, you know what, I don't know exactly what I want. And we do values work, we do mission statement work, we talk about the things that you enjoy doing, we talk about the moments in your life that have felt on purpose and purposeful. And that gives us, some groundwork for figuring out what to do next. I will say, most of the folks that I work with are not like, I'm 22 and I've just come into the world and I'm trying to figure out a career path. It tends to be more folks who are, I've been doing some things for a while, but I don't know. I've just sort of, taken what's come my way and I want to be really intentional about what I do next. And there is always work that we can do to clarify values and mission and direction and give you not a function and a job title necessarily, but your guideposts, right? Like what are the criteria by which you will evaluate different opportunities to figure out whether something could feel good. And then I see suggested reading book list. I'm not sure how I could share that other than for you to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Actually, if you could put on the next slide to make sure that we have 2.5 minutes left that everybody can see my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me um, on LinkedIn. I have a blog on my website if you find me there, or just drop me an email. It looks like some of them got listed, the confidence code and the uncertainty book. And I also mentioned mindset. Well, everybody's got them in there. I can see it in the discussion list. So those are the books. And of course, behind me, I have a whole slew of books for, all different situations. I'm just going to scroll through in the 2 minutes. So I don't see anything else in the questions. So I'm going to look in the discussion forum to see if I missed anything there. Rachel, I see your question about tips on preparing for interviews. I do this work with clients. I don't have any that I can give you in a minute and 45 seconds, but I do because it's helpful in pursuing. I mean, being clear on pursuing what you want, right? So it's not just about. Actually, probably the number one tip that I have around interviews is to make sure that you're a part of that conversation too. I think that we get into this mode of I'm in the hot seat. How do I sell them on me? And we forget to ask the most important questions for us that will help us determine whether that's an appropriate next step. We're so busy trying to sell ourselves. It's like dating and saying, I hope you like me, but I haven't decided yet whether I like you. All right. Well, I think we're down to the last minute. I'm scrolling back up. I'm delighted that you've all joined me. As you can tell by my uh, waving hands, I'm passionate about this topic. Every client, every level, every industry has challenges. Where there are things that we resist, but it's not insurmountable. We just need to get at the heart of what's going on, and try to address it. And so that's this is hopefully giving you some strategies for looking at what's going on for you. And so as we wrap up, I'm supposed to remind you to head back to the timeline to get into the next session. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day. I wish I could meet you all in person. Please do feel free to get in touch with me. It's been my delight to be here with you, even virtually today.